So let me begin sharing. I hope you've all seen that I shared the recording for our last lecture on Moodle. So we'll do the same with this one as well. So these slides, as well, they are also on Moodle already, and I've also uploaded just a few articles that explain a little bit further what benchmarking is. So last week we were introduced to this module, and specifically we summarized it down between involving two major concepts: the system life cycle and the system development process. So which is part and parcel of the system life cycle. And that's essentially what this course is about. It's about identification of a need of or an improvement of an ICT artifact or business process, going ahead and selecting, and then design, then selection, and then finally implementation, which is the system life cycle. So the life cycle also includes the management, and then eventually the system becoming obsolete and then bringing in a new system. Now, we want to talk about one of the things that supports the management process of this design, of the design selection and implementation part, which is benchmarking. In the process of design, one of the tools or one of the management tools that is adopted is benchmarking. And that's what we want to focus on today. I'm sure this is not something new to all of you, is it?
No.
No.
Yes.
When you hear the term, what comes to mind? When you hear the term benchmarking, what comes to mind?
Personally, to me, when I hear benchmarking,
Yes.
is what comes into mind is finding the comparisons of some things. For example, when I want maybe to get a good, yeah, I look at maybe someone who has used that good or product, so that I see how they used it. That also I get some insight to know if I can also use it or not. So that's
Yes.
like benchmarking a reference.
Yes. Thank you so much, Eric. I think that's what it is. Like what you summarized it well, comparison. However, it's not simply comparison for its own sake. We don't want to copy and paste, but to creatively adopt. That's a term that is used. So we want to understand the concept of benchmarking, the idea of benchmarking. We want to look at the generic approach to benchmarking. There are methodologies to benchmarking. There are quite many, but want to have just a generic approach that includes all the components that must be considered when an organization decides to do benchmarking. Standards must be applied. Standards must be applied. When we're going to benchmark, there must be standards that guide us to know what we're looking for and what we should not look at. We want to understand how to initiate a benchmarking process, then also how to engage within the benchmarking project and adopt standards. We want to contextualize standards, apply them, then also to evaluate the process of benchmarking based on standards. So we have some idea what benchmarking is. First things first, it is it is one of the things that is introduced to us to provide quality management. We want to ensure that as we're looking at making a change, it's a qualitative change, that there's an actual improvement with what we are with what our current status and where we want to go. Now, when you hear those words, it's very similar to what we've looked at in ICT strategy and policy implementation. It all starts with where am I now and where do I want to go? That gap that we have identified that exists within our unit or within our organization, what are the processes that we need to re-engineer or bring about an improvement or an efficiency? So for that matter, as Eric says, we look at somebody who is doing it and doing it better than us. Okay, that's where the quality part comes in. So it's looking at promoting process improvement and re-engineering in many prominent organizations. So this method is normally used for developing requirements and setting goals. So it also helps a lot in the identification and of requirements and specifications, the design part of the ICT design selection and implementation. So again, when you look at this diagram, it brings to mind some of the things we talked about when we were looking at ICT strategy and policy development. What is our performance level now? How do we do it? What are other performance levels? How did they get there? Okay, so we're looking at what we are now and where do we want to go. As much as we're looking at others, it doesn't mean a copy and paste, but we're looking at how have they improved this business process and how do we want to improve ours. So therefore, it leads to the part of creative adoption. So it's not copy and paste, but looking at ourselves and our mission and vision statements of where we want to go. What do we want to improve? And once we have identified those processes, we expect to achieve a breakthrough in performance. In other words, we expect to have seen an improvement from where we were before. This is where critical evaluation is necessary after benchmarking. So briefly, the concept of benchmarking has been around for some time. It was first done by Xerox, and they wanted to evaluate themselves and identify their strengths and weaknesses. And primarily, they wanted to improve their market conditions. So again, looking at improvement of business processes. So there are different definitions, but I believe this one encompasses what Eric said, comparison. Yeah, we have comparison of one's business processes with another, specifically those the other who is known to carry out best practices. Okay, another who is known to carry out best practices. So take an example. If, let us say, amongst universities, it is found that UCU has the best policy in timely and efficient school fees collection. So if UMU wants to improve in that area, then they would say, let's go and benchmark with UCU. If Makerere is highlighted as the best at research and development, then UMU would best benchmark with Makerere University. Okay, so you benchmark with the person in the industry who has been identified as the the best at a particular thing. But however, it's also important to note that not everyone in the industry is like you. That's why when we say we are comparing, we want to do a creative adoption. We are not the same. Organizations are not the same. So you can't necessarily, let's say if you're doing research, you can't necessarily compare yourself, try to copy and paste what Makerere does. Makerere University is one of the oldest universities, plus it's also a public university. So Uganda Martyrs University cannot compare itself to Makerere University, but maybe can look at some of the things they are doing very well, and therefore says, what can we, almost says, what can we adopt from this? Yeah. So basically, benchmarking is learning from others, and then learning from others to improve some processes, maybe to do things better, faster, or cheaper. Yeah. Why benchmark? Why do we benchmark? So one, benchmarking helps us to highlight areas of practice and performance. First of all, within ourselves, the one who is carrying out the benchmarking, you begin to identify areas of performance. What are you doing and how well are you doing it? It also helps you to identify your strengths and weaknesses, not just of you, but also of your competitors. Yeah? When we're trying to identify the other person who we want to benchmark with, we don't just look at their strengths, but also their weaknesses. The company also searches for the best practices and then is led to innovative ideas and highlighting operational procedures. It can help the organization know where they fall, where it has fallen behind with regard to the industry. It inspires managers to compete and also see where things can be improved. It's a positive way of looking at competition because it gets one's mind to think. Not just management, but staff members and the organization as a whole. Then we also set goals. It helps us to set goals for what we want to do. Benchmarking also key point is that it helps an organization not to reinvent the wheel. Rather than sit down and think about how you can improve something, somebody else is doing it and doing it very well. So this saves you time and money, maybe hiring consultants and so on and so forth, yet you can easily look at someone who is doing it very well within your industry. It helps to accelerate change and structuring by using tested and proven practices and also answering to the skeptics in the workplace. To when people say, if we do, if we start saying, let's change this thing, then someone says, for us, we've been doing this since time immemorial. You change it, you're breaking everything, and so on and so forth. So benchmarking has 4 basic steps, and we're going to go through each one at a time. But we start with planning. Like anything good, it always starts with planning. So planning is basically drawing the map as you begin internally. Key point as you're carrying out this planning process, it must be done with the full knowledge of top management. Why? Top management is the one which tells us because top management is the one which determines what we're doing wrong. They're the ones looking at the overall picture. Okay? The overall picture, we here at the bottom level may be focused on carrying out our processes and procedures, and we may not necessarily be seeing the effectiveness of what we're doing. But top management will be is able to tell the performance of an organization. So, as heads of ICT, if you are doing something like this in relation to ICT design or anything else within the ICT management portfolio, management must be involved. Okay, so within the planning process, you begin to establish who is who and what are they supposed to do within this benchmarking process or the project. You decide on what it is you want to benchmark. Where is the area that needs improvement? Okay? Where is the area that needs improvement? The ICT system is coming in to support business processes and procedures. So which business process and procedure needs to be improved or re-engineered? Okay. Then next, we identify the process to benchmark. Decide who you need to benchmark. Who is it in the field that we need to go and look at? Then document the current process, the process that needs to be benchmarked, the process that needs to be improved or re-engineered. What do you expect to be the outputs required for the benchmarking process? Not the process itself, but for the benchmarking process. What do we expect to be our outputs? What should be our key milestones that we must hit? And that at the end of the day, when we report back, we communicate. We say, this is what we wanted to change, and this is what we've identified as our key requirements and assumptions. We also identify the data collection methodology. Yeah. So here are a few guiding questions to help us review the planning process to ensure that we have crossed our T's and dotted our I's. We ask the questions like, what are the key processes that need to be benchmarked? Is that generally agreed that these are the processes that we need to benchmark? Key point there is we don't want to go outside of the scope. We want to keep things very, very precise. We don't want something overly ambitious as we benchmark. What exactly are the greatest improvement potentials? What do we expect to achieve once we tackle these processes, so that everyone knows what is the value of this benchmarking process? What is the expected value out of it? Again, this must also be things that are measurable. I clearly identified one measurable. What are the functions where improvements are most essential? What are the functions where improvements are most essential? So when we look at the functions, we are essentially saying, what is the function of this process? And what are the activities that are carried out? Where we expect to see disruption, where we expect to see improvement, where we expect to see re-engineering. Which ones are the most essential? Again, this is also not just identification, but also helping us with scope. Are all members of the benchmarking team familiar with the mission and long-term goals? That if we improve this process, it basically helps the organizational goals, the overall organizational goals and mission. Have the critical success factors for the organization been identified? So the critical success factors essentially help us to evaluate later on to see if our benchmarking process and eventually the design and selection process, if we have made progress, if there's been any success to our project. Do all processes require benchmarking or only the most critical? So benchmarking also of course comes with a certain cost. It's cheaper than doing something by yourself, but it also has a certain cost, not just financial, but also in terms of time. Okay, so this is something that is outside of the norm of the everyday business processes and activities. So we want to ensure that this truly is a critical area that requires benchmarking for us to improve. Has the information about all possible organizations to compare to been collected? Are we sure this is the best possible organization we can benchmark on? Is this a place where we are sure that they will give us answers? They will give us access to information. Is this the best possible place we can go to? Is this the best in class? Is the organization's best in class process likely to be innovative? How has it been decided to collect data? How superior are the results of the process of the chosen organization? How superior? To what extent are the practices of the organizations the best in class? How effectively can the process be adopted? And so on and so forth. Any questions so far before we move to the next stage? Any questions so far? No?
No. On my side, no.
Okay, let's continue. So the second stage is data gathering and analysis. So we begin the process of collecting data or observing. This also can also be seen as observing from the selected organization or organizations to determine that those particular processes, how are they doing them, what do they see as the desired the output of these processes, how did they do it, and so on and so forth. So once data is collected, we begin to normalize it. So normalizing it is basically standardizing it. If you have numerical data, you basically standardize it. If you have scales, you standardize the scales that of responses. That, let's say an example would be if you ask somebody to give the scale of highly efficient, neutral, then there's also the very poor, very poor, something like that. So you scale, you normalize it for the purposes of later on being able to do proper data analysis. You construct a matrix to compare your current performance with your partner's data. Yeah. Your current performance, your current performance and that particular organization where you have been benchmarking. Identify the outstanding practices, both on your side and their side, that need to be adopted or those which need to be thrown aside. Analyze the gaps, analyze the factors that create gaps, then communicate your findings and gain acceptance. So here are just some of the review questions that can help guide this data analysis part. Do the project team members have both analytical skills and creativity and innovation? Yeah. Do you guys have the ability to actually analyze this data? Has a gap analysis been done between the performance of the company process and that of the best practice organization? Has that been done? Have the performance gaps in the company's processes as compared to the benchmarked process been identified and analyzed? Have the reasons for better performance been brainstormed? Have the process definition documents from both companies been compared? And so on and so forth. This page also continues the same questions. You can go through these one at a time. The third is integration. So integration is now seeing how we can integrate what we have found, the gaps, or basically where we are now beginning the creative adoption. Creative adoption. What are we willing to pick up from the other side? And for us to do that, we first start by defining our targets. What is it we want to improve? What are our goals? Vision on alternative process. So we try to visualize, based on what we found, how do we intend to re-engineer or improve the identified processes? How do we expect these processes now to move? Mm-hmm. Consider barriers to change. Plan to implement the changes. So this section is also accompanied by review questions. Has it been decided to whom findings are to be communicated? Have findings been communicated to top management? Have findings been shared with all departments involved with a particular process or processes that are being proposed for change? What about the suppliers of the inputs to the process? Have they also been informed? Has the impact of revised quality of output on the process been communicated? And so on and so forth. Okay. The fourth is action and monitoring. So we develop an action plan for implementation, rollout of new modus operandi, the changes, collect data about the progress, then evaluate the progress. So here the team that has developed an action plan to implement the proposed changes. You first of all identify if you have developed that action plan. Has the team written down the changes required for implementation? Has the team arranged for activities in sequence? In order for us to carry out these changes, these are the activities that we need to carry out in sequence. This is the first activity, the second, the third, and then they are also given timelines. Have the tasks and assignments been made to the right people? Commitment for the team members, their superiors, all who will carry out the changes. Are there different teams for implementation and analysis, and so on and so forth? So here on this slide, we have a sample questionnaire with sample questions which determine if an organization is ready for change or not. So here is an example of one of the questions. Processes have been documented with measures to understand performance. So here the respondent gives most, some, so on and so forth. Employees understand the processes that are related to their own work, and so on and so forth. So here, it gives even a summary to say if most people are between 32 to 48 and is ready for benchmarking. 16 to 31 need some preparation. 0 to 15 need some help. Now we want to talk about benchmarking methodology because it's also an activity that requires a scientific look for us to be able to do it well. So now there are several of them, but for all of them, these are the generic components that we expect to find in any of them. You identify your problem area. What process do we want to look at? Identify the other industries that have similar processes. Identify organizations that are leaders, those who we can go to benchmark. Survey companies for measures and practices. Visit the best practice companies to identify leading edge practices. Implement new and improved business processes. Do we have any questions so far?
No, doctor.
Okay. So we have different types of benchmarking which an organization can carry out. And we have a list of these. One of the articles I think which I've uploaded also talks a little bit on this. So depending on what it is you want to do, what it is you want to focus on, These are the different types. So you can look at that article. It gives you also some more details on the different types of benchmarking. Now, of course, the entire purpose of benchmarking is for comparison, for purposes of improvement. Yeah, for purposes of improvement. So this improvement cycle basically expounds on the 4 stages we had talked about earlier, which starts with identification of the problem area. So this is a self-assessment, or sometimes it was a self-awareness stage. The next stage is looking at measures. What is it that lets us know we are not good at this? What is it that lets us know the current trends, what is actually going on? Third, we do competitor analysis. Then we go fourth, identify a relevant improvement approach or strategy. Learn how to implement, identify the best practice organization, research further, implement, review, and calibrate. So even as we go through this, it almost looks like the system life cycle is almost being imitated here. So this is a summary of these steps. Here we have a general framework for benchmarking. You have the plan phase, experiment phase, and then the improve phase. So all of these are essentially what we've been discussing already, the steps that we have been looking at, but simply put in a framework. The steps that we have been looking at: identification of goals, subject identification, participant identification, and so on and so forth. So the experiment phase is the actual phase when you collect data, you define what you want to collect data, analyze your data, then go through the process of now reporting your findings to the relevant stakeholders. Here are just a few questions for us to summarize this topic of benchmarking. I said this particular session is quite short. Efficiency has been defined as doing things better, and effectiveness as doing better things. Describe how benchmarking can be used to improve both efficiency and effectiveness. These are just for your internalization purposes. It's not an assignment. Explain how an organization may benefit from benchmarking organizations in a completely different industry. Yeah, consider this. Let's say if UMU decided to benchmark with NSSF, it's a completely different industry. When would such a scenario arise? This one I would refer you to the types of benchmarking. What is it we are looking to benchmark? How are critical success factors important in benchmarking? Why is it important to understand internal processes before studying those of other organizations? Remember what we said? We don't want to copy and paste. We also need to understand ourselves. Where is the gap? We don't want to come and erase it. We may not want to come and erase everything, completely do things afresh. But where is our gap? What tools are useful in studying internal processes? Do we have any question?
Yes, doctor. I have one question.
Yes, please.
Yes. Well, case in point, like let's say if is benchmarking, let's say with my career.
Mm,
We know that benchmarking, it may require some resources.
yes.
My question is, at what point do we know that we should not exceed such resources? Because I'm looking at a point whereby a lot of resources are put into benchmarking
Yes.
something, but the outcomes may not reflect the resources which were put in.
You are
So at
put
what
in.
point do we balance these two? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank you for that, Eric. One, um, I remember there was a class I taught, and there was in that class there was one of our students was, I think, working. She's basically in government, and she asked a question saying that she has participated in so many of these benchmarking processes, but they lead to nowhere. So I said, one, the end point in mind is improvement. That's the end point in mind. For someone working in government, that may not be a motivating factor. But for you, depending on most organizations, let me not generalize, because you may find some government agencies are really focused on efficiency, but uh, some are more focused on, say, keep maintaining their jobs, than necessarily getting efficiency. But let's consider someone who really wants to look at improvement. Now, when you're looking at improvement, reality, do you remember what we talked about at the beginning of the lecture, the beginning of this module? We said, look, think up realistically. Realistically, what do we want to, what is achievable? Realistically, what is achievable? We may want to do an improvement overall. Maybe our registry process, admissions, look at registry processes, admissions, look at applications, admissions. Then after admissions, we go to the academic side, teaching and learning. Then there's registry of results, results management, and then eventually the person, then the, how do we say, after results management, you have the person moving from, I don't know how to call that, but that's someone moving from one year to the next, and then eventually graduating, and you move out. All those are business processes. Someone may say, we want to look at all the business processes in registry. Then the primary question may be, okay, realistically, can we overhaul? Can we change everything? Someone may say no. Maybe it's the priority, looking at all the processes. Yeah, there's need for improvement, but the most critical part is results management. That's the most critical part. And you focus on that. And when you point out the most critical part, what you're essentially doing is scoping down the identified problematic areas. You're scoping so that already minimizes on your costs. And when it minimizes on your costs, it also ensures that there's a specific area that you're going to measure, whether there's improvement or not. So that is the whole point of going through the planning phase, to ensure that you don't bite off more than you can chew, that you are only focusing on processes that are critical, one, and two, that are manageable. I don't know, Eric, if I answer your question.
Yes, doctor, you have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Do we have any other question or comment?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, please.
I have one. Doctor, you realize that in banking, especially in our African setting, we so much put our eyes on cost
Yes.
other than value.
Mm.
Yeah. But also, we are aware that, for example, if you look at take an example of the banking, the bank setup.
Yes.
If, for example, a bank in Uganda wants to benchmark on a bank, for example, in South Africa, yeah, looking at cost only may not give results because there are many factors behind the cost. For example, the regulators, yeah, and etc. So my ask here is, how does the benchmark exercise, for example, translate into measurable value? Yeah, looking at and also I need to understand how are the benchmarking KPIs are selected, yeah, and also who is supposed to benchmark, because you realize that sometimes if you look at, for example, an example of government entities, when time for banking comes, people use time to go for shopping, yeah. So
Yes.
they fail to choose on who are the right resources to benchmark, who will capture what is required. But just people just go to represent and appear.
Yes.
So that's
yes.
my ask.
Thank you, Dennis. I think it's like if the one we've talked about cost, that how we are looking at cost, but when how then does the value of benchmarking come out? On the side of government, I think that one you've responded to it yourself. Those in government, not all of them, I don't want to generalize, but when you, most of the time when we're looking at civil servants, we're looking at those who are not necessarily interested in improvement. Yeah. There was a story, there's someone I was talking to who who essentially he has been in the private sector, and he's had a chance to consult with a government agency. And he made a comment to me in his experience. He said, when you come urgent, when you as he's consulting with them, he says, when you go into meetings with this top management at these agencies, and you come bring about the urgency about doing something, where a government agency is working with some or coming in to support the private sector, and you're pushing them to do something because of the need for survival, the need for profit, the need for come out of a crisis. And he said, what you notice is people are more interested in securing their jobs than actually bringing about an actual change. So I think there you see a situation where cost is not even, the value is not considered. Let's leave aside the cost, but the value. Now, coming down to your question of how do you justify the costs vis-a-vis the value? Simple thing, Dennis, improvement. Yeah? Coming back to these questions that are on this slide, doing things better or doing better things bring about efficiency and effectiveness. If benchmarking does lead to those two things, then it justifies the cost, but it must justify it. Yeah, it must justify it. Then three, the question of who is it that is supposed to do it? If it is you that wants efficiency, then it primarily should be the organization itself. It should be the organization itself. Why? It is the organization doing a self-assessment. It's the organization saying, we are not doing this well. We need to do better. That would be the ideal. However, there are some organizations which are too busy and may decide to hire a consultant to do their benchmarking for them. This can cost something. This may be quite costly, one, but two, you also run the risk of adopting the benchmarking process, actually adopting and carrying out the implementation of what it is you want to change. You may run that risk. Dennis, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, Doctor, you've answered. And actually, even the other one I had, I wanted to ask if we can if you can hire another firm to do the
Yes.
scoping on your behalf. You also answered it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other question or comment? If no, then we can wind down this session. This module doesn't have a lot of content. So next Saturday, we shall cover 2 sessions on Saturday. Is that okay?